All right, listener, today we're diving into some pretty heavy material. We've got Lillian's firsthand account of her escape from a violent and controlling relationship down in Guadalajara, Mexico. It's a tough story, but it's one that I think holds some really important lessons about a type of abuse that sadly affects so many people. And I think what makes Lillian's story even more disturbing is that it started out like so many seemingly normal relationships. She was just 19 when she met this guy, and he just swept her off her feet.
Yeah, and that's a really crucial point, I think, to understand. Abusive relationships rarely start out with like overt violence, right? This
Yeah.
often they begin with this period of intense charm and affection, what we call love bombing. And in Lillian's case, the deception, I guess, went even further. Her partner lied about his job, claiming to work at a deschuzadero, so like a car parts junkyard.
Okay, so red flag number one, right? He's already hiding something from the very beginning. But I imagine with all that love bombing, those initial alarm bells are probably drowned out by all the attention and the promises. What's fascinating to me is how quickly this abuser was able to isolate Lillian.
Right. Isolation is a key tactic that abusers use to gain control. And in Lillian's case, it happened very rapidly. She was forbidden from talking to friends and family, her phone was controlled, and her world really shrank down to the confines of this relationship. Then she becomes pregnant, and this unfortunately creates another layer of vulnerability.
So the pregnancy almost becomes a tool for further control. It's just chilling how abusers exploit these major life events, to tighten their grip. And then the violence starts escalating, both physically and psychologically. Lillian describes this particularly horrifying incident where he threatens her with a power drill.
Yeah, that detail is incredibly disturbing, and it really underscores the level of fear and intimidation that abusers will employ. But it also highlights, I think, Lillian's incredible resilience. Even in the face of this terrifying situation, she doesn't give up. She tries desperately to communicate with the outside world, writing notes and slipping them through a window.
It's almost like those moments of suspense you'd find in like a thriller.
Yeah.
But this is real life. And what adds another unsettling layer to her story is this whole element of ritual and spirituality. Her abuser was obsessed with Santa Muerte, the folk saint associated with death. He had this elaborate altar, conducted rituals, and even pressured Lillian to give her life to Santa Muerte.
Right. That's a crucial detail. I think that shouldn't be overlooked.
Yeah.
This introduction of this ritualistic or spiritual element can be a way for the abuser to justify their actions and further manipulate the victim into believing they have no escape. It's a form of psychological control that can be extremely powerful.
It's like he's warping reality, creating this whole other dimension where his abuse seems somehow justified or even divinely ordained. It makes me wonder, have you encountered similar tactics in other cases you worked on where abusers use religion or spirituality to kind of manipulate their victims?
Absolutely. It's a sadly common tactic. Abusers often twist religious texts or beliefs to justify their actions, making the victim feel trapped and powerless to resist. They might claim that, God condones their behavior or that the victim is somehow deserving of punishment.
So it becomes this tangled web of manipulation where the victim's faith is almost weaponized against them. And of course, Lillian's attempts to escape are met with, the classic cycle of abuse tactics, promises of change, temporary periods of calm, followed by even worse violence. It's a terrifying trap. What's important for our listener to understand is that, leaving an abusive relationship is statistically the most dangerous time.
Exactly. When an abuser senses they're losing control, the violence often escalates dramatically. They might become even more possessive or threatening, or even stalk and harass the victim relentlessly.
So Lillian's facing this impossible situation. She's pregnant, she's isolated, and the violence is just getting progressively worse. She knows she has to get out, but she's also facing immense danger in doing so. And what's incredible is that she manages to seize this moment when her abuser is gone, and she makes a run for it with her children.
And that escape, even though it was terrifying, really represents, I think, a turning point. It highlights the incredible bravery and resilience of survivors like Lilian. They choose to fight for their safety and the safety of their children, even when facing, immense danger.
Yeah, it's a choice that takes incredible strength, especially considering how often victims are blamed for not leaving sooner. And Lillian's story really underscores that leaving is a process, not a single action. There are so many factors at play, and it's never as simple as just walking away.
Absolutely. There's often intense pressure from the abuser, threats of violence, manipulation, and this constant erosion of the victim's self-esteem. It's important to remember that abusers are master manipulators. They excel at making their victims feel powerless and dependent.
So even when Lillian escapes to her sister's house, the nightmare isn't over. Her abuser tracks her down and even threatens her mother with a gun. It's just relentless. And it makes you think about those broader societal factors you mentioned. What can we do to better support victims during these incredibly vulnerable moments?
That's a crucial question. We need to shift the focus from asking why don't victims leave to understanding the complex web of control and fear that keeps them trapped. We need to provide safe spaces, accessible resources, and a system that believes and supports survivors.
It's about creating a safety net that's strong enough to catch people when they fall. And unfortunately, in Lillian's case, even after escaping that immediate danger, she faced another wave of trauma. Her abuser took his own life, but not before sending messages blaming Lillian for his death.
Yeah, this is a devastatingly common tactic that's used by abusers. It's a final act of manipulation, an attempt to shift blame and maintain control even from beyond the grave. It's crucial to recognize this for what it is. It's a continuation of the abuse, not a genuine expression of remorse.
And tragically, his manipulation worked. Lillian faced intense victim blaming from his family and the community. They told her she drove him to it, that it was her fault he was dead. It's just unfathomable.
Sadly, this kind of reaction isn't uncommon. We live in a society that often struggles to believe victims of abuse. There's a tendency to question their actions, their motives, their choices, almost as if they somehow hold responsibility for the abuser's behavior.
It's almost as if people need to find someone to blame, and the easiest target is often the victim. So instead of offering support and understanding, Lillian is hit with this wave of judgment and accusations. It makes you think, what are the root causes of this victim blaming phenomenon?
Well, there are several factors at play. We have these deeply ingrained cultural beliefs about gender roles and power dynamics, and this tendency to kind of romanticize relationships, which can blind us to the realities of abuse. And there's also a lack of understanding about the psychology of abuse and the tactics abusers use to control and manipulate their victims.
It's like we're looking at the situation through this distorted lens, missing those complex power dynamics at play. So how do we as a society start to challenge these harmful attitudes and create a culture that truly supports survivors?
Education is key. We need to raise awareness about the dynamics of abuse, the red flags to watch out for, and the ways abusers manipulate and control their victims. We need to debunk myths about domestic violence and challenge victim-blaming language whenever we encounter it.
It's about changing the narrative. Instead of asking, why didn't she leave? We need to be asking, how can we support her? And thankfully, Lillian found her way to therapy, which became a crucial part of her healing journey.
Absolutely. Therapy provides a safe space for survivors to process their trauma, to address feelings of guilt and shame, and ultimately reclaim their sense of self-worth. It's about helping them understand that they are not to blame, that they deserve love and respect, and that they have the strength to rebuild their lives.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that healing is possible even after enduring such horrific abuse. And Lillian's story also shines a light, I think, on the lasting impact of trauma on children. Her eldest son, who witnessed much of the violence, was later diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah, that's a heartbreaking but important point to address. The effects of domestic violence really ripple outward, impacting not just the immediate victim, but also their children. Witnessing violence at a young age can have profound and long-lasting consequences on a child's development, affecting their emotional regulation, their behavior, and their overall well-being.
It really underscores the urgency of breaking the cycle of violence. It's not just about protecting individual victims, but also about safeguarding future generations from the trauma of abuse. What are some of the long-term effects of childhood exposure to domestic violence that our listeners should be aware of?
Well, besides ADHD, children who witness domestic violence are at an increased risk for a range of mental and physical health problems, including anxiety, depression, PTSD, sleep disorders, and even chronic diseases later in life. They might struggle with forming healthy relationships or managing their emotions and succeeding in school.
So the impact can be incredibly far-reaching. It's a reminder that domestic violence is a public health crisis that demands our attention and our action. We can't afford to ignore these ripple effects.
Exactly. We need to invest in prevention programs. We need to provide early intervention services for children who are exposed to violence and create a societal safety net that truly supports families affected by abuse.
And in the midst of all this pain and hardship, Lillian finds the strength not only to heal, but also to advocate for other women in similar situations. She turns her pain into a force for positive change, empowering others to break free from abusive relationships.
That's a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for healing and growth.
Lillian's story is a powerful call to action. It's urging us to challenge those victim-blaming attitudes, educate ourselves about the dynamics of abuse, and advocate for policies and programs that support survivors. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in breaking the cycle of violence.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see how Lillian channeled that experience, to help others. And her story, I think, raises an important question for a listener. What can we do on an individual level to kind of contribute to this change?
Well, one crucial step is to educate ourselves about the signs of abuse. Oftentimes, it's not as obvious as like physical violence. It can manifest in much more subtle ways like controlling finances, isolating someone from their support system, or using emotional manipulation and verbal abuse.
So it's about being more aware of those red flags, not just in our own relationships, but also in the lives of, people around us. Sometimes friends or family members might confide in us about concerning behaviors from their partners. What's the best way to approach those conversations? Well, it's essential, I think, to approach those conversations with empathy and without judgment. Let the person know that you're concerned, that you believe them, and that you're there to support them. Try to avoid giving unsolicited advice or minimizing their experience. Instead, just focus on listening and validating their feelings.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's about creating a space where they feel safe to open up without feeling pressured or judged.
Yeah.
And if someone does disclose that they're experiencing abuse, what are the most helpful ways to support them?
Well, I would encourage them to reach out to a trusted friend or family member, or even a domestic violence hotline. You can even offer to help them create a safety plan, which might include things like identifying safe places to go, securing important documents, or practicing ways to escape a dangerous situation.
So it's about empowering them to take steps to protect themselves, while also reminding them that they're not alone. It's heartbreaking to think how many people suffer in silence, because they feel ashamed or afraid or trapped.
Exactly, and that's why Lillian's decision to share her story, I think, is so powerful. By speaking out, she's breaking the silence. She's challenging the stigma and showing other survivors that there is hope for healing and a brighter future.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that while healing is a journey, it's not one that anyone have to take alone. There are resources available, like the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which offers confidential support, information, and safety planning. Their number is 1-800-799-7233.
That's a great resource to keep in mind. And for our listener, I want to emphasize that even small actions can make a difference. Speaking up against victim blaming, educating ourselves and others about the signs of abuse, and supporting organizations that help survivors, these are all ways we can contribute to creating a safer and more just world.
Yeah, it's a collective effort. We can all be part of the solution. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. What will you do with this knowledge? How will you use it to make a difference in your own life and in the lives of others? Let Lilian's story be a catalyst for action, for change, and for hope.
And remember, even though this is a difficult topic, there is always hope. Healing is possible. It takes time, it takes support, and it takes courage. But as Lilian's story shows, it is possible to reclaim your life and to find peace.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some important conversations and inspired you to be an advocate for change. Remember, you're not alone, and there are resources available to help